when 18-year-old Ember's birthday celebration turns into a nightmare as the ruthless Alpha King Caspian catches her scent across a crowded market square and publicly declares her his destined mate, she discovers that being claimed by royalty isn't a fairy tale. It's a death sentence that has claimed every Omega Queen before her. Now trapped in a golden cage with a king whose touch ignites her soul but whose bloodline demands her sacrifice, Ember must uncover the deadly curse plaguing the royal family before the next full moon rises. But when she learns that breaking the curse might require her to become something far more dangerous than any Alpha King, will Ember choose love over survival or find a way to claim both? The birthday cake hit the ground with a wet splat, chocolate frosting mixing with mud as Ember dove behind the vegetable cart. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird, while angry shouts echoed through the morning market. "Find that thief!" Mayor Henderson's voice boomed over the crowd. "She stole from my garden again." Ember pressed her back against the wooden cart, trying to make herself invisible. The stolen apples in her jacket pockets felt heavy as stones. She hadn't meant for today to go this way. 18 years old as of sunrise, and she was still running from the same people who had watched her grow up in the shadows of their town. The market buzzed with early shoppers, their voices creating a protective wall of sound around her hiding spot. Mrs. Chen argued with the fish seller about prices. Children laughed as they chased each other between the stalls. Normal people living normal lives, something Ember had only watched from the outside. "There's no point hiding, girl." Mayor Henderson's polished shoes appeared in her line of sight. "We all know you don't belong here." Heat crawled up Ember's neck. She stood slowly, brushing dirt from her worn jeans. The mayor's face was red with anger, his thick mustache twitching like an angry caterpillar. Behind him stood 3 other men from the town council, their arms crossed and faces stern. "I was hungry," Ember said quietly, pulling the apples from her pockets. "I can work to pay for them." "Work?" Mayor Henderson laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. "What work can someone like you do? You don't have a family. You don't have a home. You don't even have a last name." The words stung because they were true. Ember had lived in the old barn outside town for as long as she could remember. No parents, no relatives, no one who claimed her as their own. The townspeople fed her sometimes, out of pity or guilt, but she was always just the strange girl who appeared 18 years ago as a crying baby on the church steps. "She's trouble," muttered Mr. Davis, the baker. "Strange things happen around her." "What strange things?" Ember's voice came out sharper than she intended. The men exchanged looks. Mayor Henderson stepped closer, lowering his voice. "The animals, girl. They act different around you. Dogs won't bark. Cats follow you home. And that wolf pack that's been seen near town lately, they showed up right after your 17th birthday." Ember's stomach dropped. She had noticed the animals acting weird, but she thought everyone else was imagining things. "That doesn't mean anything, doesn't it?" Mayor Henderson's eyes narrowed. "Your birthday is today, isn't it? 18 years old. That's when things change for people like you." "People like me?" Ember's hands started shaking. "What are you talking about?" Before anyone could answer, a new voice cut through the tension like a knife through butter. "Is there a problem here?" Everyone turned toward the speaker. A woman stood at the edge of their circle, tall and elegant with silver-streaked hair and clothes that cost more than most people in town made in a year. Her eyes were the strangest shade of gold, almost like they glowed in the morning light. "Lady Victoria?" Mayor Henderson stammered, his angry expression melting into nervous politeness. "We didn't know you were visiting our town." "I go where I'm needed," the woman said smoothly. Her gaze fixed on Ember with an intensity that made her skin crawl. "And today, I'm needed here." The men from the town council suddenly found reasons to look at their feet or check their watches. Even Mayor Henderson seemed to shrink under Lady Victoria's stare. "What's your name, child?" Lady Victoria asked. "Ember." The word came out as barely a whisper. "Just Ember? That's all I've ever been called." Lady Victoria's smile was sharp as a blade. Well, just Ember, today is quite special, isn't it? Something in the woman's tone made Ember's skin prickle with warning. The way she said special sounded more like a threat than a celebration. It's my birthday, Ember said carefully. Yes, it Island, your 18th birthday. A very important day for someone with your gifts. I don't have any gifts. Oh, but you do. Lady Victoria stepped closer, and Ember caught a whiff of something wild and dangerous, like the scent of pine trees and lightning storms. You just haven't learned to use them yet. The market around them had gone strangely quiet. Even the children had stopped playing. Everyone seemed to be holding their breath, waiting for something to happen. I need to go, Ember said, backing away from the circle of adults. Running again? Lady Victoria's voice followed her. You can't run forever, child. Not from what you are. Ember turned and pushed through the crowd, her heart racing faster with every step. Behind her, she heard Lady Victoria talking to the mayor in low, urgent tones, but she couldn't make out the words over the blood pounding in her ears. She didn't stop running until she reached the old oak tree at the edge of town, the same tree where she'd spent countless afternoons dreaming of a different life. Her lungs burned as she collapsed against its rough bark, trying to make sense of what had just happened. What did Lady Victoria mean about gifts? What did any of them mean about people like her? The wind picked up, rustling the leaves above her head. In the distance, she could hear something that made her blood turn cold, the long, mournful howl of a wolf. But wolves didn't howl in the middle of the day. The howling stopped as suddenly as it had started, leaving behind a silence so complete that Ember could hear her own heartbeat. She pressed herself tighter against the oak tree's trunk, scanning the forest line for any sign of movement. That's when she saw him. A man stepped out from between the trees like he owned the entire forest. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair that looked like he'd run his hands through it, and clothes that probably cost more than her barn. But it was his eyes that made her breath catch in her throat, pale blue like winter ice, and focused on her with an intensity that made her feel like prey. You're trespassing, he said, his voice carrying easily across the distance between them, despite speaking softly. Ember scrambled to her feet, her back still pressed against the tree. This is public land. Not anymore. He moved closer with fluid, almost predatory grace. Each step seemed calculated, like he was stalking something. As of this morning, I own everything from here to the river. That's impossible. The Henderson family has owned this land for generations. A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth, but it wasn't friendly. The Henderson family needed money more than they needed land. I provided a solution. Ember's mind raced. Mayor Henderson had been complaining about debt for months, but she never thought he'd sell the land that had been in his family since the town was founded. Who are you? Someone who gets what he wants. The man stopped about 10 feet away, close enough that she could see the sharp angles of his face and the way his nostrils flared slightly, like he was scenting the air. The question is, who are you? Nobody important. Liar. The word cracked like a whip, making her flinch. Nobody unimportant draws a pack of wolves to guard them while they sleep. Ember's knees nearly buckled. What are you talking about? Last night, you fell asleep under this tree after that storm hit. 6 wolves formed a circle around you until dawn. His ice blue eyes never left her face. They didn't leave until you woke up and went back to town. That's not possible. I watched it happen. He took another step closer, and Ember caught a scent that reminded her of pine forests and winter wind. I've been watching you for weeks, actually. Waiting. Waiting for what? For today. His smile grew wider, showing teeth that seemed too sharp. Your 18th birthday. Terror shot through her like lightning. First Lady Victoria with her strange questions. Now this mysterious stranger who apparently owned half the town and had been spying on her. How do you know when my birthday is? I know many things about you, Ember Rose. She jerked like he'd slapped her. That's not my name, isn't it? He tilted his head, studying her reaction. Ember Rose Nightfall, born 18 years ago during the blood moon, left on the church steps with nothing but a silver locket and a letter explaining what you'd become. The world seemed to tilt sideways. I don't have a locket, because Pastor Williams hid it from you, along with the letter. He thought he was protecting you. The man's expression darkened. He was only delaying the inevitable. Ember's hand flew to her throat, touching the spot where a necklace would rest. She'd always felt like something was missing there, some weight she'd grown accustomed to that was no longer present. Who are you? My name is Caspian Nightfall. He paused, watching her face carefully. I'm your mate. The words hit her like a physical blow. She actually staggered backward, the tree bark scraping through her thin jacket. That's crazy. You're crazy, am I? Caspian's voice remained calm, but something dangerous flickered in his eyes. Tell me, Ember, have you ever felt like you belonged somewhere else? Like the life you're living isn't really yours? She had. Every single day. But admitting that felt like stepping off a cliff with no idea what waited at the bottom. Have you ever felt stronger than you should be? Faster? Like you could sense things other people couldn't? Yes, and yes. But she wasn't about to tell this stranger, this possibly insane stranger, about the time she'd lifted fallen trees off injured animals, or outrun cars on the highway, or known exactly what someone was feeling just by looking at them. Have you ever wondered why you don't look like anyone in town? Why you don't smell like them? Stop. The word came out as barely a whisper. Why animals trust you instantly? Why you've never gotten sick, never broken a bone, never... I said stop, Ember shouted, surprising herself with the power in her voice. Caspian went quiet, but his smile returned. There she island. There who is. The alpha blood finally showing itself. He took a step back, giving her space but keeping his eyes locked on hers. You're not just any wolf, Ember Rose. You're royalty. Wolves? Royalty? Ember laughed, but it sounded hysterical even to her own ears. You're talking about fairy tales, am I? Caspian raised one hand, and Ember watched in horror as his fingers lengthened into claws, sharp and deadly. His eyes flashed gold for just a moment before returning to their icy blue. Does this look like a fairy tale to you? Ember's scream caught in her throat. She wanted to run, but her legs felt like they were made of stone. This wasn't possible. Things like this didn't happen in the real world. Don't be afraid, Caspian said, his hand returning to normal. You can do it too. I can't do anything like that. You will. Tonight, when the moon rises, your body will change whether you want it to or not. His voice gentled slightly. That's why I'm here, to make sure you're not alone when it happens. This is insane! Ember pushed away from the tree, finally finding the strength to move. I'm going home. Home? Caspian's laugh was bitter. To your barn? To a town full of people who fear you and wish you'd disappear? The words stung because they were true, but Ember lifted her chin defiantly. It's better than trusting a stranger who thinks he's a wolf. I don't think I'm a wolf, Ember Rose. Caspian's voice dropped to barely above a whisper, but she heard every word clearly. I am a wolf. The strongest, fastest, most dangerous wolf in this territory. And in about 12 hours, when your body finally accepts what it's always known, you'll be one too. He started walking away, moving back toward the forest with that same fluid grace. Where are you going? Ember called out, hating herself for asking. To prepare. He paused at the tree line, looking back over his shoulder. The transformation is painful the first time. You'll want someone who understands nearby. What if I don't want your help? Then you'll spend tomorrow morning trying to figure out why there are shredded clothes in the woods and gaps in your memory. His smile was sad now, almost gentle. But you won't be alone, Ember Rose. You'll never be alone again. He disappeared into the shadows between the trees, leaving Ember standing in the clearing with her mind spinning and her heart racing. 12 hours until moonrise. 12 hours to decide if the stranger with ice blue eyes was her salvation or her destruction. Ember woke up to find golden chains around her wrists. Not real chains, these were made of magic that sparkled like sunlight but felt heavier than iron. She sat up in the biggest bed she'd ever seen, surrounded by walls covered in paintings of fierce wolves and rolling mountains. Yesterday, she'd been sleeping on a thin mattress above the bakery. Now she was trapped in a castle room that cost more than her entire village made in a year. A knock echoed through the massive wooden door. "Princess Ember?" called a woman's voice. "The king requests your presence for breakfast, princess." The word tasted strange and bitter in her mouth. Ember touched the magical chains again, watching them shimmer. They didn't hurt, but every time she tried to walk toward the window, they grew heavier. Every time she thought about running, they pulled her back toward the center of the room. "I'm not a princess," she called back. "I'm nobody." The door opened anyway. A tall woman with silver hair and kind eyes stepped inside, carrying a tray of food that smelled like heaven. Her clothes were finer than anything Ember had ever touched, but her smile seemed real. "I'm Lady Margaret, the castle's head servant," she said, setting the tray on a small table. "And you're wrong about being nobody. The entire kingdom is talking about you this morning." Ember's stomach growled, but she crossed her arms instead of reaching for the food. "What are they saying?" Lady Margaret poured tea from a silver pot, steam rising like tiny clouds. "They're saying the king found his true mate on her 18th birthday. They're saying the prophecy is finally coming true. They're saying the kingdom might be saved at last." "What prophecy?" Ember's voice cracked on the words. The older woman's hands paused over the teacup. For just a moment, something sad and worried flashed across her face. "That's not my story to tell, dear one. The king will explain everything when you join him for breakfast." Ember looked at the magical chains around her wrists, then at the locked door, then at Lady Margaret's carefully neutral expression. "What if I don't want to join him? Then he'll come to you." Lady Margaret's voice was gentle but firm. "And trust me, Princess, that conversation will be much harder than the one waiting for you downstairs." The dining hall was enormous, with a ceiling so high that Ember had to crane her neck to see the top. Long tables stretched across the room, but only one small table near the windows was set for 2 people. King Caspian sat at one end, reading papers and drinking coffee from a cup that looked tiny in his large hands. He looked up when she entered, and Ember's breath caught in her throat. In yesterday's chaos, she hadn't really looked at him not properly. Now she could see the sharp angles of his face, the way his dark hair caught the morning light, the careful way he watched her like she might disappear if he blinked too hard. "Good morning," he said, standing up and pulling out her chair. "I hope you slept well." Ember stayed by the door, her magical chains humming softly. "I slept like a prisoner." Something flickered across his face, guilt, maybe, or pain. "I apologize for the restraints. They're temporary, until we can ensure your safety." "My safety from what?" She took a step closer, and the chains felt lighter. "From running away?" "From my enemies." His voice dropped lower, more serious. "Ember, when I claimed you yesterday, I didn't just make you my mate. I made you a target." The room suddenly felt colder. Ember moved to the table and sat down across from him, studying his expression. "What kind of target?" Caspian set down his coffee cup and leaned forward. "There are people in this kingdom who don't want me to have a mate. People who benefit from my condition." "What condition?" He was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands. When he looked up, his eyes held secrets that made Ember's skin prickle with goosebumps. "Every king in my family line has been cursed," he said finally. "We can only rule alone. If we take a mate, if we truly bond with someone, the magic that gives us power starts to fade. Within a year, we become as weak as ordinary wolves." Ember's heart hammered against her ribs. "Then why did you claim me?" "Because the alternative is worse." His voice was barely above a whisper. "The curse doesn't just take our power, Ember. If we don't find our true mate before our 30th birthday, we go mad. We become monsters that hunt our own people." The room spun around her. Ember gripped the edge of the table, trying to understand. "How old are you?" 29. The words hung in the air like storm clouds. "My birthday is in 6 months," and cried. "So you're using me to save yourself from going crazy," she said, anger starting to burn in her chest. "And then what? You lose your power and someone else takes over the kingdom?" Caspian's jaw tightened. "That's what my advisors believe will happen. That's what happened to my father, and his father before him." "But Ember," he reached across the table, his fingers stopping just short of touching hers. "I think there might be another way." "What way?" "The old stories talk about a mate strong enough to share the burden instead of breaking it. An Omega who could take half the curse into herself, letting both of us survive." The magical chains around Ember's wrists grew warm. She looked down at them, then back at Caspian's hopeful face. "And you think that's me?" "I think you're the first Omega in 3 generations to make the chains respond like that," he said softly. "I think yesterday, when I caught your scent, something in the magic recognized you." Ember stood up abruptly, the chair scraping against the stone floor. "This is insane. Yesterday I was worried about having enough money for bread. Now you're telling me I'm supposed to save a kingdom by sharing some ancient curse?" Caspian stood too, moving around the table toward her. "I'm telling you that I felt something yesterday I've never felt before. I'm telling you that every instinct I have is screaming that you're meant to be here. And what if your instincts are wrong?" Her voice shook. "What if I can't share the curse? What if I'm just a regular Omega who's going to watch you go mad in 6 months? He stopped in front of her, close enough that she could see the gold flecks in his dark eyes. "Then at least I'll have 6 months of not being alone." The honesty in his voice hit her like a punch to the stomach. Ember looked at this powerful, dangerous king who ruled over thousands of people, and suddenly all she could see was a man who'd been carrying an impossible burden his entire life. "The chains," she said quietly. "How do I get them off?" "They'll fade when you accept the bond." His hand hovered near her face, not quite touching. "But Ember, once you accept it, there's no going back. You'll be bound to me, to this kingdom, to whatever happens next." She thought about her tiny room above the bakery, about the empty years stretching ahead with no family, no pack, no place to belong. Then she looked at Caspian's face and saw the same loneliness reflected there. "What happens if I say yes?" A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth, the first real smile she'd seen from him. "Then we figure out how to break a curse that's held my family prisoner for 200 years. The magical chains pulsed once, bright and warm, and Ember felt something deep in her chest respond to the call. The poison hit Ember's system like liquid fire. She'd been reaching for her water glass, laughing at something Lady Margaret had said during their afternoon tea, when the first wave of pain crashed through her body. The crystal glass slipped from her fingers and shattered against the marble floor of the sunroom, but Ember barely heard it over the roaring in her ears. "Princess!" Lady Margaret's voice sounded far away, like she was shouting from the bottom of a well. "Guards! Guards!" Ember tried to stand, but her legs wouldn't hold her. She collapsed forward, her hands hitting the small tea table and sending delicate porcelain flying. Her vision blurred, then sharpened, then blurred again. Everything in the room looked like it was melting at the edges. Heavy footsteps thundered down the hallway. The sunroom door crashed open, and suddenly Caspian was there, his face white with terror. He dropped to his knees beside her, his hands hovering over her body like he wanted to touch her but was afraid he'd make things worse. "What happened?" His voice was deadly quiet, the kind of calm that came before hurricanes. "The tea," Lady Margaret stammered, pointing at the broken cups scattered across the floor. She drank the tea and then, "Get Dr. Hoffman, now." Caspian's eyes never left Ember's face. "And bring the poison kit from my study." Ember tried to speak, but her throat felt like it was closing up. She could hear her heartbeat getting slower, more uneven. Each breath took more effort than the last. Somewhere in the back of her mind, a small voice whispered that she was dying. Caspian must have seen the fear in her eyes, because his expression shifted from controlled panic to raw desperation. "Stay with me," he said, his voice breaking on the words. "Ember, look at me. Stay with me." She wanted to tell him she was trying, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, she reached up with a shaking hand and touched his face. His skin was warm and real, an anchor in the storm of pain raging through her body. "Sir, I need you to move back." Dr. Hoffman appeared beside them, his medical bag already open. He was an older man with steady hands and the kind of voice that stayed calm during emergencies. "I need to examine her." "No." The word came out as a growl. "I'm not leaving her." "Your Majesty, if this is nightshade poisoning, I need space to work. Please." For a moment, Ember thought Caspian would refuse. His hand tightened around hers, and she could feel the tremor running through his fingers. Then he leaned down and pressed his forehead against hers. "Fight," he whispered. "Whatever this is, fight it." Dr. Hoffman's hands were quick and professional as he checked her pulse, looked at her eyes, smelled her breath. "Definitely nightshade," he said grimly, "but mixed with something else, something I don't recognize. Can you save her?" Caspian's voice was barely human now, more wolf than man. "I can try. But sir, this wasn't an accident. Someone wanted her dead, and they knew exactly what they were doing." The words hit the room like a bomb. Lady Margaret gasped and pressed her hand to her mouth. Caspian went completely still, and when Ember managed to focus on his face, what she saw there made her blood run cold despite the fire in her veins. His eyes had changed. They weren't brown anymore, they were the pale gold of a wolf's eyes, and they held a promise of violence that made the air in the room feel dangerous. Who had access to the tea? His voice was so quiet it was almost a whisper, but every person in the room heard it clearly. I don't." Lady Margaret was shaking. "The kitchen staff prepared it. The guards brought it up. I served it myself." "The guards?" Caspian stood up slowly, his movements controlled and predatory. "Which guards?" "Thomas and David. They've been with the castle for years, sir. They would never." "Get them, now." As Lady Margaret hurried out, Dr. Hoffman worked over Ember with tools and medicines that smelled sharp and medicinal. The pain was starting to fade, but so was everything else. The world felt muffled and distant, like she was sinking underwater. "Sir, her pulse is getting weaker." Dr. Hoffman's voice carried urgency. "If this was targeted specifically at Omegas, I might not have the right antidote." Caspian spun around. "What do you mean? Specifically at Omegas, nightshade affects everyone the same way. But there's something else in her system, something that's attacking her Omega biology directly. I've never seen anything like it." The room started to spin faster. Ember could hear voices talking about her, but they sounded like they were coming from very far away. She tried to focus on Caspian's face, using it as an anchor, but even that was getting harder. Then the sunroom door flew open again, and everything changed. "Your Majesty!" Thomas, one of the guards, stumbled into the room with blood on his uniform and panic in his eyes. "We found David! He's dead!" Someone cut his throat and left a message. Caspian's transformation was instant and terrifying. His canine teeth elongated, his fingernails became claws, and the careful control he always maintained shattered completely. "What message?" Thomas held out a piece of paper with shaking hands. "It says the Omega dies tonight, and the king dies alone." A sound came from Caspian's throat that wasn't human at all, a roar of rage and pain that made the windows rattle. The partial shift he'd undergone made him look like something from nightmares, caught between man and beast, beautiful and terrifying at the same time. "Lock down the castle," he snarled. "No one goes in or out. Search every room, question every person. Find whoever did this." "Sir, yes, sir." As Thomas ran out to follow orders, Dr. Hoffman looked up from his work with worry etched across his face. "Your Majesty, her breathing is getting more shallow. If I can't figure out what that second poison is, then you'd better figure it out fast." Caspian knelt beside Ember again, his partially shifted form making his voice deeper, more dangerous. "Because if she dies, I'm going to tear this kingdom apart until I find who's responsible." Through the fog of poison and pain, Ember heard those words and felt something stir in her chest. Not just fear or love, but something fiercer. Someone had tried to kill her not because of anything she'd done, but because of what she meant to Caspian, because her death would hurt him. The thought made anger burn through the poison haze. She'd spent her whole life being powerless, being overlooked, being treated like she didn't matter. But now someone thought she mattered enough to murder. "Cass," she managed to whisper, her voice barely audible. He leaned closer immediately, his golden wolf eyes fixed on her face. "I'm here. I'm right here. Don't let them win." Something shifted in his expression. The wild rage was still there, but underneath it she could see the man she was learning to care about. Intelligent, determined, and absolutely devoted to protecting what was his. "I won't," he promised, his claws carefully stroking her hair. "I'm going to find them, and I'm going to make sure they never hurt anyone again." Dr. Hoffman cleared his throat. "Sir, I think I know what the second poison island. It's not meant to kill her directly. It's designed to make her body reject the mate bond. If she dies while fighting off that magic, the trauma will trigger your curse early." The room went dead silent except for Ember's labored breathing. "Someone wants you to go mad tonight," Dr. Hoffman continued quietly. "They want you to lose control while she's dying in your arms." Caspian's eyes flashed with understanding and fury. "Can you counteract it? Maybe. But it's going to require something I can't provide." "Doctor." Hoffman met his gaze steadily. "She needs to accept the mate bond completely. Right now, while she's fighting the poison, the connection might be strong enough to burn the magic out of her system. And if it doesn't work, then the bond will tie you to her as she dies, and the curse will take you both." Ember felt Caspian's hand tighten around hers. Through the haze of pain and poison, she could see him weighing the choice risk everything to save her, or let her die alone to preserve his sanity and his kingdom. But as she watched his face, she realized it wasn't really a choice at all. Not for him. "Do it," he said. Ember's hands shook as she traced the jagged scar running down Caspian's chest, the wound still angry and red in the moonlight, streaming through his bedroom windows. "Someone tried to kill you," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the sound of rain pattering against the glass. "Many have tried." His words came out rough, like gravel. This one almost succeeded. The bandages around his ribs told a story of claws and fury. 3 days had passed since the attack in the royal gardens, and Caspian had refused to let anyone but Ember tend to his wounds. Now, sitting on the edge of his massive bed, she finally understood why. "Show me what happened," she said, her fingers gentle on his skin. Caspian's jaw tightened. "You don't want to see that side of me. I want to see all of you." The words tumbled out before she could stop them, honest and raw. Something shifted in his storm gray eyes. Slowly, carefully, he reached for her hand and pressed it flat against the scar. "Close your eyes." The vision hit her like a lightning strike. She saw through his memories the garden at twilight, the scent of jasmine heavy in the air, then the sudden rush of movement from the shadows. 3 wolves, larger than any she'd ever seen, their eyes glowing with an unnatural silver light. They moved like ghosts, silent and deadly. But it wasn't their attack that made her gasp. It was watching Caspian fight back. His wolf form was magnificent and terrifying, black fur rippling over muscles that could crush stone. Yet even in his fury, even while bleeding, he held back. She could feel his restraint, like a chain around his heart. "Why didn't you kill them?" she asked, opening her eyes. "Because they were once my friends." The confession hung between them like a blade. Ember's heart hammered against her ribs as she waited for him to continue. "The curse doesn't just take Omega Queens," Caspian said, his voice hollow. "It twists everyone it touches. My childhood friend Marcus, my cousin Leo, my brother's best friend Jake. One by one, they've all turned against me, driven mad by magic they can't control." Ember felt cold, despite the fire crackling in the hearth. "What kind of curse does that?" "The kind that feeds on love." His laugh held no humor. "Every person I care about becomes a weapon pointed at my heart. That's why I stayed alone for so long. That's why I tried to push you away." "But you didn't push me away." "No." His hand cupped her cheek, thumb brushing over her skin like she was made of glass. "I couldn't. The moment I caught your scent, every wall I'd built crumbled. You smelled like home." Ember leaned into his touch, her heart breaking and healing at the same time. "What happens now? Now you understand why being my mate is a death sentence." Caspian's voice cracked on the last word. "The curse won't stop until it takes you too. Either it will drive you mad like the others, or what? Or it will demand your life to break itself." The rain outside grew heavier, drumming against the windows like urgent fingers. Ember thought about the empty rooms in the castle, the portraits of beautiful women whose eyes seemed to follow her down the halls, the way servants whispered and crossed themselves when they thought she wasn't looking. "How many?" she asked. "How many what? How many queens died because of this curse?" Caspian was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. 7. Over 300 years, 7 Omega Queens have died trying to break the curse. What happened to them? They tried to sacrifice themselves on the night of the blood moon. The magic consumed them, but the curse remained. His arms tightened around her. "I won't let that happen to you." "Maybe they were doing it wrong." His head snapped up. "What do you mean?" Ember pulled away, pacing to the window where rain streaked the glass like tears. An idea was forming in her mind, dangerous and wild and completely insane. What if the curse doesn't want a sacrifice? What if it wants something else? "Ember, think about it. 7 queens died the same way, and nothing changed. What if we tried something different?" Caspian was off the bed in an instant, moving despite his injuries to catch her shoulders in his hands. "I won't lose you to some mad experiment." "You're already losing me." The words came out sharper than she intended. "Every day I stay here, the curse gets stronger. I can feel it whispering in my head, trying to turn me against you. How long before I end up like your friends?" His face went pale. "You feel it?" "Since the poisoning attempt. It started small, just little doubts, tiny fears, but it's getting louder." She touched his face, memorizing every line and angle. "We're running out of time." Caspian pulled her against his chest, his heartbeat rapid under her ear. "Then we leave. Tonight, we'll go somewhere the curse can't follow." "It will follow. You know it will." Ember pulled back to meet his eyes. "Your brother told me about the old legends, about Omega Queens who were more than just sacrifices. Darian spoke to you?" Danger crept into his voice. "He visited while you were unconscious. He said some very interesting things about our family history." She watched his expression darken. "Did you know there were Omega Queens who ruled alongside their mates? Queens who had power of their own? Those are just stories. What if they're not?" Ember moved to his desk, where ancient books lay scattered across the polished wood. "I've been reading while you recovered. Look at this." She opened a leather-bound tome to a page she'd marked with ribbon. The illustration showed a woman with golden hair standing in a circle of light, her hands raised to the sky while a great wolf knelt at her side. "Queen Isadora," she read aloud. the last Omega Queen to break a blood curse. It says she didn't sacrifice herself, she transformed it. Caspian leaned over her shoulder, his breath warm against her neck. Transformed how? It doesn't say. But look at the date. She pointed to the faded ink. 350 years ago, right before your family's curse began. The realization hit them both at the same time. Caspian's curse hadn't started randomly. It had been created when Queen Isadora died. A twisted echo of whatever magic she'd used to break the previous curse. We need to find out what she did, Ember said. We need to find out what went wrong, Caspian corrected grimly. Thunder crashed overhead, and somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled long, mournful, and filled with unnatural hunger. The scream that tore through the castle walls at midnight wasn't human. Ember bolted upright in bed, her heart hammering as the sound echoed through the stone corridors like a wounded animal's cry. Beside her, Caspian was already moving, his body tense as a drawn bow. "Stay here," he commanded, reaching for the silver blade he kept beside the bed. Like hell, Ember grabbed her robe, her bare feet hitting the cold floor. Another scream split the night closer this time, filled with rage and something else that made her skin crawl. Pain. Whoever was making that sound was in agony. They raced through the dim hallways, following the sounds of destruction. Paintings hung in tatters on the walls. Ancient vases lay shattered on the marble floors. Claw marks gouged deep trenches in the wooden doors. The throne room, Caspian breathed, and they ran faster. The massive oak doors had been torn from their hinges. Inside, chaos reigned. The great throne sat broken in half, its gold inlays scattered like fallen stars. Tapestries hung in bloody ribbons from the walls. And in the center of it all stood Prince Darien. But it wasn't Darien, not anymore. His body had twisted into something between human and wolf, his spine curved at impossible angles. Silver fur sprouted in patches across his skin, and his eyes glowed with the same unnatural light Ember had seen in Caspian's memories. "Brother," the thing that had been Darien rasped, his voice layered with harmonics that hurt to hear. "You're just in time for the show. Darien, what have you done?" Caspian stepped forward, his hand tight on his weapon. "What you never had the courage to do." Darien's laugh was broken glass. "I embraced what we really are." That's when Ember saw the bodies. 3 guards lay crumpled near the far wall, their necks twisted at wrong angles, but they were breathing shallow, pained breaths that meant they were still alive, still suffering. "You're killing innocent people," she said, stepping out from behind Caspian. Darien's grotesque head swiveled toward her, those glowing eyes focusing with predatory intensity. "Innocent? No one in this castle is innocent, little Omega. Especially not you. Let them go. Your fight is with me. My fight is with everything he loves." Darien gestured toward the broken guards. "I wanted him to watch them die slowly, but you've given me a much better idea." He moved faster than thought, crossing the room in a single bound. Caspian intercepted him halfway, the brothers colliding with a sound like thunder. They rolled across the floor in a tangle of claws and fury, neither fully human nor fully wolf. Ember ran to the injured guards, checking pulses and wounds. 2 were unconscious but stable. The third, a young man she recognized from the kitchen staff, grabbed her wrist with surprising strength. He's not Prince Darien. He wheezed through bloody lips. Something else, wearing his face. "What do you mean?" "The real prince. Died 3 days ago. I saw the body." His grip tightened. This thing, it crawled out of his corpse. Horror washed over Ember like ice water. She turned toward the fighting brothers, seeing the battle with new eyes. Caspian was holding back, trying not to hurt what he thought was his little brother. But the creature wearing Darien's face had no such restraint. "Caspian!" she screamed. "It's not him!" Silver claws raked across Caspian's chest, reopening his barely healed wounds. He stumbled backward, blood streaming down his ribs. "I know exactly what I am," the Darien thing hissed. "I'm what the curse creates when it's finished playing with someone. I'm what happens when the magic finally wins. It lunged again, but this time Caspian was ready. His own transformation rippled through his body, not the controlled shift Ember had witnessed before, but something raw and desperate. His wolf form was massive, midnight black with eyes like silver fire. The two beasts crashed together in the center of the destroyed throne room. But where Caspian moved with lethal grace, the Darien creature fought like madness given form. It felt no pain, showed no strategy, existed only to destroy. Ember pressed herself against the wall, her mind racing. The dying guard had said the real Darien was already dead. But if that was true, what was animating his body? Then she remembered the book from Caspian's room, the illustration of Queen Isidora standing in a circle of light, the way the curse had started right after her death. "You're not Darien," she called out over the sounds of battle. "You're the curse itself." Both fighters froze for a heartbeat, the creature's glowing eyes fixed on her with hungry interest. "Clever little Omega, much smarter than the others." It spoke through Darien's mouth, but the voice was layered with echoes, dozens of voices speaking as one. "Did you figure out what I really am? You're what's left of Queen Isidora's magic. When she tried to transform the original curse, she didn't destroy it, she just changed it, made it stronger, hungrier." The creature's twisted smile was all teeth. She thought she could bend ancient magic to her will. Instead, she fed it everything she loved, her mate, her children, her entire bloodline. Caspian snarled, circling the creature with predatory focus. "And now," the thing continued, "after 300 years of feeding on this family's pain, I'm strong enough to take physical form, strong enough to finish what she started. What do you want?" "What I've always wanted. To consume everything this bloodline holds dear, until nothing remains but hunger and darkness." It moved again, but not toward Caspian, toward her. Ember had half a second to react. Her body moved on pure instinct, power she didn't know she possessed flooding through her veins. Light erupted from her skin, brilliant white gold that sent the creature shrieking backward. "Impossible," it hissed. "You're just an Omega. You have no power." But Ember could feel it now, the same magic that had flowed through Queen Isidora, dormant in her bloodline for generations. The power to transform curses instead of just breaking them. "I'm not just an Omega," she said, the light around her growing brighter. "I'm what comes after." The creature's form began to waver, Darien's stolen features melting like wax. Underneath, something far older and more terrible started to emerge. Shadows given shape, hunger made manifest. "You don't know how to control it," the curse snarled. "The power will consume you, just like it consumed her." Maybe it would. But as Ember looked at Caspian, wounded, desperate, still trying to protect her even from this impossible enemy, she knew she had to try. The light blazed brighter, and the real battle finally began. The ancient stone circle glowed red under the blood moon as Ember's bare feet touched the cold granite where countless Omega queens had died before her. Prince Darien's mad laughter echoed off the towering stones while King Caspian lay chained to the altar, silver bonds burning his wrists raw. "Finally, little Omega, you understand your purpose," Darien sneered, his claws dripping with Caspian's blood. "Your death will give me the power our family has craved for centuries." But Ember wasn't listening to the crazed prince anymore. Something deep inside her chest was awakening. Something that felt like fire and lightning dancing together. The old queen's ghost had visited her dreams last night, whispering secrets that made her heart race with terrible hope. "You're wrong about everything," Ember said quietly, walking toward the center of the circle where ancient runes carved into stone began to glow brighter with each step she took. "The curse doesn't require death, it requires choice." Darien's yellow eyes narrowed dangerously. "What are you babbling about, you worthless?" His words died as Ember placed her hands on the largest stone, and power exploded outward like a shockwave. Every wolf within 10 miles felt it a calling that reached into their very bones and demanded attention. The Omega girl, who had smelled like flour and fear just months ago now, radiated something that made even the strongest alphas drop to their knees. The first Omega Queen wasn't sacrificed, Ember continued, her voice growing stronger as ancient memories flooded her mind. She chose to bind herself to the land, to become something more than wolf, more than human. But her sons were too greedy to understand the gift she offered. Caspian struggled against his chains, his eyes wide with understanding and terror. Ember, no. If you do this, I'll what? She asked, turning to look at him with eyes that now held flecks of gold that moved like living fire. I'll become powerful enough to save you? To save our pack? To finally break the curse that's been eating your family alive for 300 years? The stones around the circle began to hum with energy that made the air itself seem thick and electric. Darian snarled and lunged toward her, but an invisible force slammed him backward into the outer ring of stones with bone-crushing impact. "You can't control this power!" Darian screamed, blood streaming from his nose as he struggled to stand. "It will consume you just like it consumed her." Ember smiled, and for the first time in her life, she felt truly free. "Maybe, but I'm not trying to control it, I'm trying to understand it." She closed her eyes and reached deeper into the well of power that seemed to have no bottom. Around her, the very ground began to shake as roots and vines erupted from the earth, wrapping around Darian's legs and arms before he could move. The plants glowed with the same golden light that now poured from Ember's skin like liquid sunlight. "The curse was never about sacrifice," she whispered, and her words carried to every corner of the sacred space. "It was about transformation, about becoming something new instead of clinging to something old." Caspian watched in amazement as the silver chains around his wrists simply dissolved, turned to harmless dust by the wave of healing energy that flowed from his mate. For the first time in months, the constant burning pain in his chest, the pain of the curse trying to eat him from the inside, completely disappeared. "How did you know?" he asked, sitting up slowly as feeling returned to his limbs. Ember opened her eyes, and they were no longer the soft brown he remembered. Now they held depths like ancient forests, wisdom like old mountains, power like raging storms contained in a small, determined frame. "Because I listened to what the earth was trying to tell us," she said simply. "Your ancestor didn't curse your bloodline, he broke something that was meant to stay whole. The Omega Queens weren't meant to die. They were meant to become guardians, protectors of the balance between the human world and the wolf world." The vines holding Darian began to glow brighter, and his screams of rage turned to something else, something that sounded almost like relief. The madness that had twisted his features for years was melting away as the corrupt power he'd stolen was drawn out of him like poison from a wound. "You're healing him too," Caspian breathed, understanding flooding his face. Ember nodded. "The curse made him sick, made your whole family sick, but sickness can be cured if you know the right medicine." As the last of the stolen power left Darian's body, he collapsed to the ground, unconscious but breathing peacefully for the first time in decades. The stone circle's glow began to fade, but the change in Ember remained. She was still herself, but more like a flower that had finally been given enough sunlight to show its true colors. "Is it over?" Caspian asked, reaching for her hand. Ember intertwined their fingers, marveling at how perfectly they fit together. "The curse is broken. Your family is free. But our real story? That's just beginning." 6 months later, Ember stood in the castle's rose garden, watching a group of young Omega children practice their newly discovered abilities under the morning sunday. Word had spread quickly through the shifter world. The age of hiding was over, and Omega wolves everywhere were awakening to powers their grandparents had forgotten existed. "Careful with the fire flowers, Mira," Ember called out gently as a 7-year-old girl made tiny flames dance between her palms like living petals. "Remember, power shared is power multiplied." The little girl beamed and nodded, her flames growing steadier and more controlled. Around her, other children were discovering gifts that had been sleeping in their bloodlines for generations: healing touch, plant magic, the ability to communicate with wild animals, even small weather workings that could bring rain to thirsty crops. Hard to believe they were considered the weakest members of our packs, Caspian's warm voice said behind her as strong arms circled her waist. When they're clearly the most magical. Ember leaned back against his chest, still amazed by how safe she felt in his embrace. Not weakest, just misunderstood, like a lot of things were. The castle itself had changed too. Where once cold stone corridors had echoed with the whispers of ancient curses, now warm sunlight streamed through windows that had been sealed for centuries. Gardens that had withered under the weight of dark magic bloomed with flowers that glowed softly in the moonlight. The very air felt cleaner, lighter, full of possibilities instead of dread. "The council meeting went well?" Ember asked, turning in his arms to study his face. Caspian nodded, though his expression remained thoughtful. "Better than expected. 3 more packs have asked to join our alliance, and the human governments are finally ready to discuss official recognition treaties. It hadn't been easy these past months. Convincing the other packs that Omega Wolves deserved equal standing had required patience, demonstrations of their new abilities, and more than a few heated arguments that had nearly come to claw fights. But slowly, surely, the old ways of thinking were giving way to something better. "And Darian?" she asked softly. "Still recovering, but improving every day. He asked about you again, wanted to know if you'd visit him this week." Ember smiled. The Broken Prince had become one of her most ardent supporters once the curse's madness left him. His genuine remorse for the pain he'd caused had led to a friendship none of them had expected. And his knowledge of the old magic had proven invaluable in helping other cursed bloodlines break free from their own dark histories. "I'll go see him after the children's lesson," she decided. "He's been working on that history project about the original Omega Queens, hasn't he? Night and day. I think he's found references to at least 12 other bloodlines that were affected by similar curses. If he's right, we might be able to help hundreds of families reclaim their true heritage." A comfortable silence settled between them as they watched the children play. Their own bond had deepened beyond anything either had imagined possible. Not the desperate, possessive claiming they'd started with, but a true partnership built on choice, trust, and shared purpose. "Any regrets?" Caspian asked quietly, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. Ember considered the question seriously. 6 months ago, she'd been a frightened girl with no family, no pack, no future, beyond hoping someone might want her enough to claim her. Now she wore a crown that had been remade from living gold, ruled beside a king who valued her counsel above all others, and commanded respect from wolves who had once looked through her like she was invisible. But more than that, she'd found her true self, not defined by what others expected of her, but by what she chose to become. "Only one," she said finally. "What's that?" She turned to face him fully, rising on her toes to brush her lips against his. "I regret that it took a deadly curse to bring us together. Imagine how much trouble we could have avoided if you'd just asked me to dance at a normal pack celebration." Caspian's laughter was rich and warm, filling the garden with joy. "Next time I'll try the less dramatic approach." "Next time?" His eyes sparkled with mischief. "Well, we still haven't had a proper honeymoon, and I hear there are some very romantic places in the world that don't involve ancient stone circles or family curses." Ember grinned, feeling lighter than air. Now that sounds like an adventure worth having. As they walked hand in hand back toward the castle, the children's laughter following them like music, Ember caught sight of the pressed dandelions displayed in the front hall, the same wilted flowers from her 18th birthday, now preserved under glass as a reminder of how far they'd traveled. She'd started that day as a girl with nothing, and somehow become a queen with everything. Not because someone had claimed her, but because she'd learned to claim herself. The future stretched ahead of them like an unwritten story, full of challenges and joys they couldn't yet imagine. But whatever came next, they would face it together, 2 hearts that had chosen each other against all odds. Two souls that had learned that the strongest bonds aren't forged in desperation, but in freedom. And sometimes, on clear mornings, when the light hit the castle walls just right, visitors claimed they could still see golden flowers blooming in the cracks between the stones, a lasting reminder that even the most broken places could become beautiful again, given enough love and time to heal.